Well, good morning. I'm Mark Rothermich, product specialist with Genesis Ag, and I'm here today with Josh Davis, Vice President of Genesis Ag. And Josh, we're here today to talk a little bit about some of the things we saw in 2024 as guys have wrapped up harvest. We're in early December, so we wanted to take a little time and talk about the results that we might have seen, things with the different products that we've had in use this year and talk a little bit about maybe next year as guys start making plans. So, what are your thoughts this morning?
Yeah, it's here the 1st of December, guys are getting all their data kind of compiled after harvest, looking at what their average yields were, looking at what profitability looked like in 24. And I've been getting a lot of that feedback and getting a lot of our test results back as well, and trying to mesh all that together so guys can make an informed decision for what they learned in 24 to go into 25. I think the challenge that we're still facing is a lot of our input prices aren't adjusting to commodity prices. And then that puts us as producers in a pretty tough situation of, okay, I feel like I need to do this because historically I've done it, or the university's telling me I need to do it, but I can't make it pencil on paper. So I'm having a lot of conversations about, okay, what are some alternatives? How can I access things in my soil bank account, so to speak? How can I do some things to ensure a maximum yield and a maximum profit going into 2025?
Yeah, I've kind of talked with guys, and it's kind of the elephant in the room. And obviously, I think going into this, still maintaining optimum yields is going to be important.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in row crop agriculture especially, we're still in a yield driven market. Profit is kind of the secondary effect until we get to the end of the year, and our accountant says, well, what happened here? As farmers, we don't really think, yeah, I want to grow 2, 3, 4, 500 bushel yields depending on what crop you're growing, but can we do that profitably? And I think now that commodity prices are as low as we've seen them in, I guess, 10 years, and input prices, especially your commercial fertilizer, are still at the top end of that threshold. And even some of the chemistries, even seed, nothing is really adjusting to $4 corn and $10 beans.
Exactly, for sure. Well, how about if we go ahead and start talking about some of those products? I thought we'd start today with a couple of just good foundational products from our lineup that can be used across to pretty much in any situation. So the first one that I had on my list was Carbos. Tell us a little bit more just briefly about Carbos.
Yeah, so looking at carbos, we look at energy, or we look at how can we stimulate our soil and our plant, and how can we use that energy to assist us in that yield driven scenario of how can we push that next 2 or 3 bushel out of that crop. A lot of times people look and say, well, okay, carbos is a biological energy source, and that's what I like to call it, because people have native biology in their soil. We've got native biology in ourselves as humans. How can we feed that, especially the beneficial bacteria? Because carbos is a specifically generated source for beneficial bacteria. How can we fuel that to change our soil and help our symbiotic relationship of the plant and the soil to push out yield? We did some tests this year that came back of adding carbos to an M furrow, changed that scenario to a positive 7 bushel scenario in corn, and looking at that was a $4 expenditure to get a 7 bushel return. Let's say at $4 corn, we're looking at about a 7 to 1 return on investment just for that one application. And then we did some subsequent applications over the top with another product that I think we're going to talk about later, Vita Terra,
Mhm.
stimulating the soil biology, stimulating the plant's ability for photosynthesis, which creates its own energy, but we're just trying to push that threshold a little bit more. We got a compounding effect out of that to take our ROI even higher on that. So definitely keeping as much gas in the tank as we can keep is kind of what Carbos is doing to really fuel what positives we already have going on. And then anything else we put in that tank mix, we can make that much better.
Yeah, the exciting thing for me, Josh, when we talk about Carbos is we're still learning about this product and its uses and where it fits. And as we've had guys using it, as you mentioned, subsequent applications throughout the season, and we've upped our rate a little bit. We used to be 4 ounces, and through some works that some of our guys have done, we've seen bumping that to 8 ounces is giving us more response, more positive response with that product. And so now most of our recommendations have moved to 6 or 8 ounce application rates, which is what you referenced in your pricing of it. So for myself, when I look at when would we look at using Carbos, for me, you mentioned an in-furrow application. Obviously, most of our biology feeds on the carbon that's either in the soil or that's produced by the plant. Well, early in the season, before those plants get any size or corn even starts photosynthesizing to produce any carbon to feed that biology, we can put that in the system and get that biology churning early in that plant's life and feeding it and making it happen. So to me, we want to start out right off the year with the Carbos in the system. Then a lot of my guys have gone to, we try to fit this into places where it's convenient, where guys may not have to make an extra application, but something that it fits in. So the next obvious one for the guys I work with a lot of times is when they're doing a post-emerge pass, still early in the season. I've got guys that are implementing it there. And then as we get into grain fill, a lot of people are doing fungicide applications. It's another great time to add Carbos to that system. And many of the guys I've worked with have been finding, especially late in the season on soybeans, that they see a significant greening effect when they're using the Carbos in the system. And a couple of my guys that have really been kind of playing with rates have actually mentioned that they're seeing with each subsequent application, they're seeing the effect of that Carbos last longer. So where on the first application, I may see it last 5 to 7 days. The second one, it may go 10 days. I've got one guy that's telling me that he's seeing 15 plus days of darker green in his soybeans with his third application. So I think feeding that biology throughout the season so it can support that plant and keep nutrients flowing to it is a big key with Carbos.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to look at is, and kind of like we mentioned earlier, is we've got a large bank of fertilize in our soil, either through applications over the years or just your native soil type. Something as simple as Carbos, guys looking at maybe cutting some of their fertilizer back and are a little skeptical about losing yield. If we can do something as simple as Carbos, low use rate, low cost, to keep the soil active, to keep their nutrients soluble, then we're not going to have that fearful lapse that guys are thinking could happen by using less fertilizer. And like you mentioned, we've got the in-furrow ability. We can put it with your post-emerge chemistry and put it with your fungicide, at an 8 ounce rate. Let's say the 8 is the top end. You're looking at 24 ounces throughout the season. That could be 12 or less dollars, depending on, early pay discounts or quantity
Mhm.
to get a better price on that. So let's just say it's $12. What if we could cut our fertilizer in half? I've had several guys come to me with fertilizer budgets and say, "What do you think about cutting this in half?" And taking $100 out of a potential budget and having some confidence behind spending $12 on carbos seems like a good relationship to maintain or possibly increase yield through biology.
Exactly. And one of the other things I've seen, Josh, and my guys have commented about, several of my producers have experienced, especially kind of at the tail end of the growing season the last couple of years, it's starting to get dry. They haven't had those consistent rains, and they've been a little, they feel kind of like they've been shorted a little bit on the rain. I'm actually starting to see carbos as a stress mitigator because they've seen improved yields under those scenarios where they've been using the carbos. I think that's something, while we've always considered it part of our stress program that we have in place with a few of our other products, I think carbos has a great fit just to help during those stress times, even on its own.
Right, and that goes back to the symbiotic relationship of the plant and the soil. If we can keep that relationship strong, even though we may have a dry topsoil or we may have a stressed plant, the biology is the key here. Everybody wants to look at fertilizer or look at rainfall, but biology can overcome a lot. A healthy biological system in soils can retain a lot more moisture than something that may not be optimally uh, or at its peak biologically. So that's where the just keeping the energy out there, and that's why I like calling carbos a biological energy source. So guys can say, okay, I want to keep my biology going and I want to keep the plant going and do all those things. So yeah, definitely getting through stresses or over stresses, as some people say, is a definite key of carbos.
Totally agree, 100%. Did you have any other thoughts about carbos at this point?
No, I think just the easy synopsis of it is low cost, low use rate, and put it in every chance you get at some capacity. And if we want to deem that 24, even 32 ounces would be the most we would recommend in a row crop scenario, that's still not that big of an expenditure. And looking at the advantages of it, I feel like it's just a no brainer.
So we talked a little bit about how carbos helps with stress. Let's talk about another product in our lineup that for me really helps a lot during stress situations, and that would be Vita Terra Plus. Give us a little synopsis of what Vita Terra Plus is.
So it's an organic acid. There are a lot of humic fulvics on the market that are derived from a leonardite or a peat source, but we use a compost through mushroom compost to create this liquid. So we've got a lot of naturally occurring beneficial things in this product. We do get a humic fulvic analysis on the back end, but what we see is where we're derived from a plant media, growing mushrooms and the media within that, that the plant is a lot more receptive for uptake, either through the roots or even foliarly. We went out in competition with a lot of other fulvic acids on the market that claim that they can increase bricks. And the thing about a leonardite extracted product is the molecule is too big to get in through the pores of the leaf. What we're able to do with our compost extract is get in through the pores of the leaf and increase the bricks. I know that bricks aren't really a big thing in row crop, but you start getting in specialty crops, and bricks is a very big measuring tool. And we can increase bricks almost immediately, but most of our tests have been done within 30 minutes. And if we can increase bricks, that's a higher sugar content in the leaf, helps the plant photosynthesizing and increase the amount of root exudate that that plant can secrete back to the soil and in that nutrient cycle.
One of the analogies I like to use, Josh, when we talk about some of our products, is that they're almost like an energy shot. And reflecting back to carbos, that's kind of an energy shot for the biology.
Yes.
To me, Vita Terra is the energy shot for the plant because, as you mentioned, it increases the photosynthetic efficiency of that plant. So anytime this plant is stressed, it reduces the photosynthesis of of the amount of sugar or carbon that it's able to produce. as you mentioned, we're increasing that bricks, we're making that plant more efficient. And anytime that plant is stressed, it's kind of like you and I, we reach for vitamins or we reach for something to boost our system when we're feeling a little groggy. And one of the places that we've seen really good responses is when we incorporate Vita Terra with a post-emerge herbicide application. Tell me a little bit about your experiences there, and then I might share a little bit too.
Yeah, so what we're doing there, and we apply these chemistries to a crop, whether it be corn, soybeans, whatever it be, and we think that these chemistries, just because the plant is tolerant to it, that it does not affect it, which is not necessarily true. It just doesn't kill it to an aspect. That's where we get the yellow flashing from, or the pale color when we apply it, because the plant basically gets sick, even though we're doing it for weed control, to to be able to have a clean field, and all the crop will come out of it, is what people, especially uh, guys like my grandfather, used to say, well, it'll come out of it. Well, why is it in that situation to start with? The thing about adding a product like Vita Intera is, much like you or I taking a fulvic acid as humans, is it will chelate to those compounds that aren't native to that plant or us as humans, and help metabolite get those through the metabolism of the plant and get them out of the plant, or us as humans out of our bodies. And I like trying to do things as far as human health and relate this, so guys can say, well, I really haven't thought about that, but that's the critical piece of applying Vita Intera with your chemistry, is just so the plant, yeah, it'll have a bad day, but it gets it out of the system quicker.
I had some guys had some great examples of that this year, Josh, that I'd like to share real quick. And we're all familiar with our corn, and there's kind of that stage where a lot of our fields kind of hit that part of the field's starting to green up, or some of the plants are picking up that darker green color, and some of the others are still lagging a little bit. And producers this year, especially some of the guys that planted early in the window, they were seeing that situation in their corn, and they called back to one of the guys I work with, and we're talking about that within a day or two of after doing their post-emerge application with the Vita Intera, that the entire field was just a consistent dark green. So that immediate effect that it's having on that plant of boosting it and helping it springboard out of that stress. One of those producers was able to do some testing in a couple of fields in a few spots, and he reported in corn that he picked up a 4.4 bushel yield increase across several checks. So obviously a very good return there. On soybeans, you mentioned yellow flash, and with one of the herbicides chemistries he was using, he was experiencing that. And while he had carbos in the system, which obviously is going to help some, he did checks where he put the Vita Intera with it as well. And in soybeans, he noticed less intense yellow flash from the chemistry and a shorter duration of it. And at harvest, again, through multiple checks, he picked up 4 bushel on soybeans. So this year, either one of those, 4.4 on corn or four bushel on soybeans, this year, as you mentioned, Vita Intera, about $2.50 an acre for the 16-ounce rate. That's a pretty good ROI.
Sure. Yeah, one of our tests that I looked at this year was adding carbose and Vita Intera to a post-emerge chemistry application, and it was fairly aggressive. It was in a heavy uh, pigweed scenario, so we're putting some harsh chemistries to keep those at bay while the crop was trying to grow, and the two together were a 7+ bushel advantage on that. Not trying to do any calculation on your 4 bushel advantage of the one product, but definitely adding those two together 7 bushel advantage is something to look at. And if that reasoning is something as simple as chemistry metabolism, that is something that we should all be looking at as producers, just especially on corn. And I think a lot of times we don't think of corn, but so much, but we're only producing that 1 ear on a corn plant. And if we know that our ear determination is between V4 and V8 most of the time for your girth and for your length, if we can not have a bad day, we could optimize our ear size. Not necessarily saying that we're going to add 2 or 4 rows around or 10 length, but I look at overall ear weight, and I know you've done a lot of ear weight calculations, but if we can do things to increase our ear weight by chemistry metabolism, that's something we need to be focusing on.
It sure is. It sure is. We're all most of our producers today are at the upper end of their yield levels in a lot of situations. And at this point, we're kind of looking for those little things we can do to add a couple bushel here and a couple bushel there in the system and keep that consistency. So tell me just a little bit briefly. We've talked about these two products. I mentioned them kind of to me being foundational products. Give me just a quick overview where you see these two fitting together for guys. How do you approach the use of these products?
Well, again, we mentioned carbos being a multi-use or every use product. Vita Intera is kind of the same way. And one thing about Vita Intera that we did not talk about was putting it with your 32%, 28%, whether that be starter or side dress. If you're in a liquid scenario, the neat thing about that is being able to help the plant not have as much injury from the high salt in those products and also help with nitrogen metabolism in the plant. See, the cool thing about Vita Intera is it's got some naturally occurring things in it that will help the plant metabolize nitrate nitrogen. We don't really focus on what type of nitrogen we're uptaking in our plant, but nitrogen needs to flow through the plant and turn into an amino acid. It's just not uptake and retention, it's uptake and utilization, and then it flushes an amino acid back out through the roots. But if that system gets stopped up at any point, then that limits the other functions of the plant and other functions of nutrients that the plant needs to uptake. So that is something we haven't hit on yet. But really, both Carbos and Vita Intera could be every time you go across the field, be in the tank at some capacity to help with increasing soil biology, increasing the plant's ability for photosynthesis, increasing your symbiotic relationship, nutrient metabolism. There's just a long list of things that these two products could do, and that's why we have them in every pass that we recommend from a Genesis Ag perspective.
And I'll just echo that I've got a few producers who are at that point where they're using it multiple times in combination. They've been very happy with everything that they've seen from crop response in just from the application to the yield side of it too. So
Yeah, and it's not that we're asking producers to make another pass, but these products, both Carbos and Vita Intera, can be added to an existing pass and increase the efficiency and everything we've talked about to this point. So just add it to a current pass and look at the benefits.
absolutely. At this time, I'd kind of like to move to a different realm a little bit. Obviously, those are good, solid products, can be used across every acre. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our biological products because at Genesis Ag, we believe that biology is probably the new frontier and really the next step in our yield progression on our farms and looking at the things that biology brings to that. And I wanted to spend a little time talking about Revita N, which is kind of our our flagship product that has so many different things that it does within the system. Give us just a quick overview of Revita N, Josh.
Yeah, so we're looking at a diversity of aerobic and anaerobic bacteria that we're trying to place into a system. Again, like I mentioned earlier, talking about carbos, everyone has native biology, but either through practices or the curve that we've went through the last 40 or 50 years of fertility applications, chemistry change, and all of that, we've got to a point of a biological imbalance in our soil. So Revita N is a product that we can apply to try to balance the biology back out. And biology is something that we inevitably don't pay attention to. We look at fertilizer or chemistry as our solution to an issue. We don't look at biology being a piece of that pie. And I don't want to say that it's a three-piece pie. Um, I think there are a lot more things that go into it, but looking at how can we keep a balanced biological diversity out there to optimize the yield that we're going for. So we can do this through a soils application and just begin to naturally change soil. And that's how this product started when we first began using it. Let's see, that's been 15 years ago now that we started using this product. We learned over time that if we put this in an in-furrow application, we didn't have to wait so long to see the difference in yield. Yeah, we could see the difference in soil within a year with the soils application, but putting that biology in the in-furrow application and getting the biology working with the root system when the seed germinated, man, guys started getting the first year response and we're like, hey, this is something worth looking at. And then going even further in that, once you've used the product for 3 or 4 years and you look at the difference in soil test, because we still value soil test maybe too much as an industry, but it's still a measuring stick. You start looking at the differences in soil test and then you start talking about something.
The thing that I've seen, Josh, in the years of my work with Revita N is just there are a lot of biologicals on the market that target one thing. We're going to give you more N, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. We're going to help. We're a residue management product. I have seen in my time working with Revita N all of those things happen from this single product because it's so diverse in its makeup. Obviously, yield, that's one of the keys. And often we do see that yield bump happen with it. But beyond that, the things that I talk with my guys about watching for, you mentioned nutrient availability within the soil and how that biology does that. That's a big thing that we've seen. And we'll talk a little bit more about these as we hear on the subject. But some of the other things I've seen, changes in soil structure, soil tilt. Guys talk about when they go to the field where they've used Revita N, that the implements pull easier, significantly easier. So we're affecting that soil tilt, the porosity of that soil, and opening that soil up also allows us to infiltrate water and helps with air exchange that the biology needs to flourish. So we're seeing all of those impacts happen. We're seeing things happen with plant health just in general through the season, and especially late season plant health. Guys are reporting more and more often that they're getting into corn and harvesting it at with still green left in sometimes the leaves and especially the stalks, with corn that's much drier than they thought it was going to be by looking at the plant. Well, that late season plant health helps so many things. And then again, beyond that, we're seeing after a couple of years of use, residue breakdown is happening much faster through the season. I've got producers who are kicking out 300 bushel yields. There's a lot of residue in those fields. And when we go back that next season, even under no-till or strip-till scenarios, when we get to harvest, there's no residue left because the biology is active and it's breaking that down and cycling those nutrients back into the system faster.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll share two examples with you, and then we can move on. But one of the first times I saw this, I got in a combine with one of my dad's friends, and my dad said, just watch the yield monitor as you go across the field. And this was a 7 tower pivot, 126 acres going across the field, and the yield monitor hardly moved. And the guy kept making comments that the corn has never been that consistent across the field. There would be spots that might be 250 plus, and then the yield monitor would go to 190, 200. We were going across that field and it was consistent all the way across the field. And this was after he started using Revita N. And my dad said, "What did you see?" And I didn't understand then what I was looking at, but we could make fields more consistent as well.
Yeah.
Guys always have the honey spot that they can cut an NCGA at 290, 350, whatever it be. But what did that field actually average with all that really good corn? If we could start impacting those lesser areas and bring those up closer to the mean, then as farm averages go up, in my mind, that should be profitability, unless I'm doing some bad math.
Yeah.
But if we could get your mean or your average to start creeping up, then that's a win. Yeah, the 10 acres for an NCGA is fun, but we're farming thousands of acres trying to make money at it. Then the other thing would be is looking at your nutrient bank in the soil. And like I said about soil tests, we look at a different soil test, and I know you and I both have several examples of our total nutrient density, but looking at how much we've got in our soil versus how much is available, when we start getting those numbers to a relative percentage, because you're never going to be 100% soluble, but if we could get those numbers up to where we feel like a percent solubility should be, then that gives us even more opportunity to increase yield and increase profitability.
It absolutely does, Josh. And as I've dug deeper into that subject of nutrient usage, nutrients in our soils, you mentioned our total nutrient digestion test. I have a lot of questions. I don't have the answers yet, but I'm seeing things happen that don't always match up maybe with some of the things we've been taught. And for me, a great example I had was this year, working with a producer for several years now. He had picked up a new farm 2 years ago, so we went in the fall of 2022. We pulled a sample off of this and ran it through. And as you mentioned, this test gives us not only the available component, but beyond even what a lot of tests that guys run, it gives us even a deeper look at what's the total amount of those nutrients in our soil. So we've got both the available component, but also what's really in the stockpile, in the warehouse of that soil for nutrients. So we went back this fall and we repeated those tests. And I go back to the exact same spot with climate and pull from the exact same spot. So we take out that variability potential of, being different parts of the field where we're doing the test. And it was very surprising when we put those numbers up that in almost every case, every nutrient throughout that test. Now, I will say this, his available phosphorus did go down a little bit, but the total phosphorus in that test actually went up. And every other nutrient in that test on both the available and the total component outside of sodium went up. So my next question, and I presented this at one of our calls a few weeks ago, and that producer happened to be on the call. And I told everybody, I said, the one thing I haven't had a chance to do is check with him to see what he applied for fertility on this, that we were seeing an increase in these numbers. And he spoke up and he said, well, he said, I can tell you what it is. And it was due to some special circumstances. The producer before him had applied significant amounts. He had applied a couple of years of fertility leading into that season and things. So he didn't apply any fertility the first year because he felt like it was already there. Some other circumstances this past year, he actually has not applied any additional P or K to that farm in the last 2 years. He produced 76 bushel soybeans this year, 235 bushel corn last year, and all of the numbers, as I mentioned, except for available phosphorus, went up on that test. I think part of that is the abilities that the Revita N that he uses are bringing to the system. But I think for me, the big thing as we talk about profitability for the next year or two is working with these tests. We're seeing a lot of situations where guys are reducing their fertility inputs. Now, I'm not saying we're never going to put fertility down. That's not my, my story. But let's look at what we can do, especially as in some of these years, maybe we can adjust our input dollars where we're putting them and rely on that stockpile that we have in our soils. We get down the road a couple of years and we're seeing a few things, that we think we want to address, then we can do that when either profitability or input prices have adjusted.
Yeah, I agree with that. And kind of back to what I said earlier, in talking about Carbos and Vita and Terra, even something as simple as that, introducing your fertilizer, if you can keep your energy out there and keep the plant healthy, keep the plant energized, a lot of those nutrients can do that. And the cool thing that kind of to go on with what you were saying about this particular farm soil test is as an industry, we've not applied things as far as micronutrients in the last 20 or 30 years. Guys have just started applying zinc and boron and sulfur. But if you look at those numbers that are on these soil tests, where did that come from? Because we've never applied it and we've not been applying it in these particular years, but those numbers are going up. So, people can talk all they want to about phos and about potassium, but you look at all these other nutrients that the industry has somewhat neglected, and we're increasing those numbers as well, knowing that the crop is carrying some capacity of that off.
Absolutely. So to me, I think the Revita N has a great fit, especially if a guy is looking at how can I adjust my budget for next year? Can I reduce my fertilizer inputs? But how can I still have a little bit of a backup plan there to incorporate? And for me, Revita N's a long-term play as well. Yes, we get immediate impact, but this is an investment in your future. And all of us are expecting to continue farming for several years. So why not take a long-term approach to the way we're farming? And that's the way I see Revita N is it's not just a this year impact, but we can build on that and compound in the future of what we can do with it.
Sure, that's perfectly said.
We talked a little bit about plant health, and obviously that's a big issue. More and more of us are looking at ways to combat some of the pathogens that are in our system. And obviously there are a lot of pathogens that are getting a lot more attention these days, Josh. Things like tar spot, white mold in soybeans, sudden death, and along with some of our more conventional old school, I guess, pathogens and diseases that we fight. Let's talk about something in our program that we see as being an alternative to that, and that being Instago. Tell us a little bit about Instago.
Yeah, so Instago is still a relatively new product for us. We started messing around with it in 2019. I think we went commercial with it in 2021. It was out on a limited basis in 20, but it's a plant probiotic. And when say plant probiotic, people say, well, it still need a fungicide. Well, this is an alternative to a fungicide. And when we start looking at how can I promote optimal plant health and how can I do all these other things is be doing it proactively or probiotically like what we're doing. We've been in a study for 3 years now, and we've came out as a net positive over the industry standard fungicide on the market. And a lot of these have been in heavy, especially tar spot, but we've been in heavily diseased areas, and we're beating the best on the market, whether, and I won't call any names on that. We all know who the claim best fungicide on the market is, and we're beating it consistently, not by a huge margin, but we're beating it with a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach to disease management. And the other thing in comparison to fungicides is let's look at it in comparison to human health. And we'll go with the cropping calendar as well with this. So Mark, if you know that you're going to get sick every year, the end of July, are you going to proactively take antibiotics, or are you going to take your probiotics to try to build up your natural defense and build up your native soil biology in your gut and in your body, or are you going to take an antibiotic proactively and crash your system?
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. And one of the things, the ways that I kind of like to explain it, most of us are familiar with when we go out and we spray an insecticide for a pest that we may want to get rid of in our crops. We know that that has an effect on the beneficials out there as well.
Sure.
And the same process happens when we apply a fungicide on our fields. They're not indiscriminately just choosing uh, to work on the detrimentals. They have an impact, and we've seen that through some of our testing on the beneficials that we want out there to continue to thrive. And I think that's one of the benefits. To me, even if we only end up with a net even yield benefit to a conventional fungicide, if we can use something that is not harming the beneficials that we want to have out there working for us. And I think in many cases we also have a price advantage with Instago over those conventionals. To me, that's a win. And that's a great
Sure.
reason to consider using Instago as an alternative.
Yeah, and the long-term approach. There are a lot of universities and other biological companies, not necessarily that work in the ag space, looking at what all of these chemical applications are doing to our soil. Think something like Instago can actually put some of those beneficials back in place and start a long-term approach to disease remediation in these crops rather than constantly having to apply fungicides to get to the theoretical mean that we want to get to. We set ourselves up for success in the future. And I remember, and it's been in my lifetime, and you may remember when fungicides first came on the market and were widely used, but guys started out using them one time, then they went to two times, and now there are some of these high yielding producers using fungicides three, four, and even five times in a row crop scenario. And to me, it's like, why is that plant that unhealthy that we need to do that? Why do we not try to grow a healthier plant, being proactive on things rather than going out and trying to clean the slate mid-season and hope we still get positive outcome.
That really brings to mind to me, Josh, two things. There's probably 2 points here for me. The first one is I spent part of my life after I quit farming in the turf industry. And if you want to understand fungicide use, you talk to people in sports turf, golf courses, things like that. And the big challenge that they faced, because I mean they're obviously trying to keep every disease off of those courses, is resistance buildup within that pathogen community to fungicides with repeated uses. And that's one of the big fears I have with the fungicides. And I know in the ag industry, they're trying to blend chemistries to slow that down. But we've seen those challenges in the herbicide part of our world with resistance buildup. And that's one of the concerns I have with fungicides long term as well. With Instago, we're not going to deal with that type of a situation because it's a natural product in the way that it performs. So,
Right.
so that's one key for me. One of the other things with Instago that I think has a huge spot in the future is the fact that it can benefit our system with an early season application because it can have activity as a soil applied product being systemic within that plant, also working around that root zone as that plant grows in helping that plant be more healthy. You talked a lot about having a healthy plant, so that's one aspect, but also its ability to maybe work within that soil profile. Many of the diseases we face overwinter in the soil or in the residue. And they're laying there waiting for conditions to get right in the next crop to proliferate. If we can be doing things to reduce that pathogen load in the system, and to me, that's a big plus and a big component of where the Instago can have a big impact.
Right. And I guess there are several things I'll add in on that is definitely getting the approach started early and getting that proactive approach. There is a product out on the market that people have been trying to use. The in-furrow use really compromised the stand through germination. So now that product has moved to the starter band or 2x2, but it's a really hard to use product. People don't want to use it. We actually went through some testing 2 years ago in comparison to that product. Were much easier to use, and we got as good or better of a result than that product did. And we're doing it proactively and putting beneficials out there rather than trying to sterilize that root zone. And now I've got producers that have shifted to Instago in their in furrow for their disease management. And now they're saying, well, I don't have to be as rigid on my late season disease management application, whether that be at V10 or VT or brown silk, whenever that be. I've got some flexibility because we're seeing Instago create that much of a healthier plant from the early season application. Then we're getting to a one pass deal on the back end. And if we can get to a one pass disease management, and I always like to use disease management because fungicide is not a term that I don't think any of us are comfortable using, but disease management, if we can eliminate one of those late season passes and preserve yield, then we get that compounding effect. We actually increase yield in the long term.
And definitely profitability.
Sure, sure. And again, we're at a much better price point. Instago as a standalone is $14 per acre. Then you look, if we add carbos to it, just for the sake of calculation, we might could get to a $17 or $18 price tag. We're still, unless you're getting a huge rebate or kickback or something, and I know companies like to do that, but we're still cheaper, especially cheaper than the product in furrow or the 2x2 product, but even your industry standard and industry leading late season products, we're competitively priced or cheaper there as well. If you are a current fungicide user, I think definitely looking at what we've been seeing in all of our tests, we're not saying that it's going to go out and be 10 or 20 bushel better. In a lot of our studies, it's roughly a 4 to 5 bushel advantage over industry standard. Then look at the compounding effects we can have by reducing the effect we're having on soil biology and looking at the long-term approach. So we're at a net positive in the short term as far as bushels, and price point is probably determined by each farmer of what they're purchasing and what they're selling their crop for. And then looking at the long term in that, I would take an additional 4 bushel at $4 is 16, an additional $16 per acre that would just be pure profit for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, in my mind, even if we net zero with the other benefits that Instago brings, I think it definitely deserves a shot.
100%.
Well, Josh, we've covered several things here today. I guess the things in my mind that look like probably the most broad spectrum products that we would encourage guys to look at for 2025. Is there anything else in your mind or on your mind today that we might want to mention?
No, I think keeping in mind that we've got low commodity prices and producers are searching for alternatives, I think we've definitely covered the things that could be easy to do and get started. And if we can show a positive response at these low commodity prices and start that rolling in, if we ever get back to $6 corn and $12 beans, then guys have some confidence rolling back into that. But I think the 4 products that we've talked about here today will be a fit for most every producer at some capacity to take a look at as alternatives to the challenges we're facing in ag today.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And I guess I would just like to encourage everybody, if you're starting to make plans for 2025, you may be making some decisions here before the end of December. I know there's a lot of programs out there. Josh, we do have a discount program, prepaid program that will be announcing here too. I guess I would just encourage guys to reach out to you or myself or one of their other Genesis Ag, if they're working with somebody else in Genesis Ag. Reach out. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about how these fit. You mentioned you've been working with guys on their budgets. I do the same thing. Let's look at how we might be able to tweak some things and look at maybe penciling in something that looks a little more exciting for next year.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Josh, any other closing thoughts or comments today from you?
No, just definitely getting a plan together and seeing how we could help guys still maintain and increase yield. But the big thing for us is making sure those guys are profitable in doing that.
Well, Josh, I'd like to thank you today for taking a little time with me to go through this and share some of this. I think it'll be a big help for everybody. Would like to thank everybody that tunes in to this for giving us some time to listen to the things that we're seeing. And with that, we'll just sign off and say thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Mark.